The Niners just wrapped up their first 3-day period of training camp, and while many eyes are on the quarterback battle between Trey Lance, Sam Darnold, Brock Purdy, and Brandon Allen, in this video, I want to talk about a major addition the Niners made this offseason, and maybe we're already seeing the results of that addition in their defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks. If you guys didn't know, Steve Wilks' major emphasis is on the defensive back or secondary part of the defense, while the predecessors, DeMeco Ryans and Robert Saleh, had an emphasis on the linebacking core. So during this offseason, we've already seen some development from players that were good last year, but maybe have taken a better step this offseason. One of those guys is Samuel Womack. He's been performing extremely well throughout camp. The first day, he was pretty adequate in coverage, but moving on to day 2, he was targeted 4 times and only gave up 1 catch and nearly picked off Trey Lance. And that catch he gave up to was Deebo Samuel, so can't fault him too much. Moving on to day 3, he performed well again and broke up a deep pass to Ray McCloud. He's honestly fantastic in coverage, and even when he's beat, he recovers nicely. Moving on to another cornerback, Ambry Thomas has surprisingly had a strong camp. He hasn't been beaten too much, and even on day 3, he started in place of Charvarius Ward and wasn't even targeted by any of the quarterbacks. And that's great because that's an indicator of how solid his coverage was. Steve Wilks has also had his impact by bringing in rookies that seem to be pretty good so far. One of those guys is Deshaun Jamison, and he's been targeted a couple of times, but really doesn't get beat. Even on day 3, he broke up a pass intended for Deebo Samuel. Right now, he's mainly playing with the second team defense, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's an undrafted guy that makes the roster this year. Another player that Steve Wilks has brought in is Isaiah Oliver. He has taken all the first team snaps at nickelback and played exceptionally well, almost picking off several quarterbacks. So now that we examine some highlights from the cornerback position, let's examine the safeties and Steve Wilks' impact there. Tashaun Gibson has played exceptionally well throughout this camp, despite many people labeling Jair Brown as his replacement. But Gibson's not giving up his job easily. He's nearly had a pick 6 and looks solid in coverage. Additionally, Jair Brown in the second team has looked good. He's flying around sideline to sideline, but I don't know if he's done enough to actually challenge Gibson for his role yet. Additionally, Gibson has been seen blitzing and Talanoa Hufanga, which is an addition that Steve Wilks looks to bring to this defense. He's going to be a much more aggressive defensive coordinator than his predecessors, DeMeco Ryans. For instance, DeMeco Ryans blitz like bottom half of the league, while Steve Wilks is routinely top 10, top 5 in the league in blitz rate. With corners and safeties out of the way and some of the highlights there, let's move on to the linebackers and players that have really stood out on day 1, 2, and 3. Well, the starters are Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, and then Oren Burks was the third team linebacker. Burks even has nice plays on the second day. He broke up a pass to TDP and is flowing nicely sideline to sideline. Additionally, Marcelino McCrary-Ball has forced drops to TDP as well and made stops in the backfield. I'm pretty impressed by Marcelino McCrary-Ball's body this year. As you guys know, he was a safety coming out of college and needed to put on mass to be effective in the linebacking role. This offseason, he does look to do that. And Jalen Graham even looks good. He's been involved in sacks and going untouched for a blitz on day 2. Additionally, linebackers we expect to perform well have performed well, including Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner. And a nice surprise has been D. Winters, who looks improved from his OTA performance, which I expected since I said he probably just needed time to recover. And now he's flying sideline to sideline and looking like Dre Greenlaw, who John Lynch envisioned him to be. This doesn't necessarily mean he'll start this year, but the Niners have a record of developing these guys for 1 year and then inserting them into the lineup, and I don't see why D. Winters or even maybe Jalen Graham can't be that guy. The third linebacking role, in my opinion, is open for competition, and we'll really see it heat up when pads come on. Moving on to another position that's important when pads come on is the defensive line. So let's talk about players that have stood out so far. Perhaps the player that I think has made the biggest jump from year 1 to year 2 is Drake Jackson. He's put on some serious mass and looks strong. I mean, he almost has a quicker first step than last year, despite I think being heavier than last year, which is something that Chris Kasarik has talked about this offseason. Drake Jackson has been challenged by Kasarik to become a pro's pro, meaning stacking days, and just understanding what he needs to do to get his body right and prepared for such a long season. Many of these guys haven't played in a season this long ever in their entire lives, and they don't realize what it's actually going to take. Drake Jackson realized it this offseason though, and looks completely different. And when pads come on, I expect him to continue to dominate. Great news, while the Niners are working out the bookend opposite of him that I think is going to be Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa will get a big contract in my opinion. I'm not really too concerned about it. But there's also been some news on the interior of the line with Javon Hargrave making big sacks and just really beating Banks off the line quickly in day 2 and looking like what the Niners expected. But maybe a player the Niners didn't expect to do so well this offseason is defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. This is a guy that the Niners envisioned replacing Buckner a few years ago. It didn't live up to that, to say the least. He's been largely ineffective due to injuries, which has been unfortunate to him. This offseason, he does look in really good shape. He's moving around quickly, has an extremely quick first step in comparison to last year. He looks like a great player, but I have seen this before where Javon Kinlaw says, I'm fully healthy, and then he does sustain another injury, unfortunately. I'm not necessarily believing it up to this point, and I'll be excited to see how he holds up going into training camp. But nonetheless, I do wish Javon Kinlaw a fruitful career, and I hope he does do well. Other players that really have shined on the defensive line is Kevin Givens. Givens has been on the Niners defensive line for a while now, but he looks amazing. He's quick, he's in great shape, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him make an immediate impact as a rotational piece. Furthermore, the Niners rookie, Robert Beal Jr., does look as fast as advertised, and I'm excited to see what Chris Kasarik can develop him into, and maybe even just rotate him in once or twice a game in a pass rush scenario and just get him getting after the quarterback. He has one of the fastest first steps I think I've ever seen, so I'm excited to watch that. Another player that's done good things is Eric Armstead. On day 3, he beat Aaron Banks for a would-be sack on Brock Purdy. So these are the players that have really impressed me so far during training camp, and I love to hear players that have impressed you on Steve Wilks' defense. But going into this year, I do expect Wilks to have a defensive unit that's a great one. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they're a number 1 unit again. Given that Steve Wilks has already gotten the most out of Ambry Thomas, it seems like, and is developing the secondary nicely and coupling in blitzes, I'm excited. I think that Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans were both great coaches, but Steve Wilks has the experience that really can't be taught. You have to live it, and Steve Wilks has a ton of that, and I think it's going to kick Niners defense up to a new level with the addition of Javon Hargrave and Drake Jackson coming into his own on year 2. I'm excited. But with all of that being said, I want to hear what you guys are excited for most for this upcoming season. Who's your player to watch this training camp? It would also mean a ton to me if you liked and subscribed. And as always, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day and weekend.